The cemetery was silent, except for the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. He stood there, staring at the small gravestone with his son's name etched into it. His heart felt heavy, as it always did when he visited this place. The pain of losing his only child had never faded, not even after years had passed. He knelt down, placing a single white rose on the grave, his hands trembling slightly. As he stood up, he heard a faint whimper. At first he thought it was his imagination, but the sound came again, soft, weak, and filled with sorrow. He turned around, scanning the area, and that's when he saw it. A dog, thin and frail, was lying near a tree a few feet away. Its eyes were fixed on him, filled with a sadness that mirrored his own. The dog didn't bark or growl. It just stared, as if it understood his pain. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly walked toward the animal. The dog didn't move, but its tail gave a faint wag as he approached. He crouched down, reaching out a hand, and the dog leaned its head into his palm. The touch was warm, comforting, and for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something other than grief. "What are you doing here, boy?" he whispered, his voice breaking. The dog whimpered again, as if trying to answer. He looked around, but there was no one in sight. No owner, no collar, just this lonely creature, sitting by his son's grave. Without thinking, he took off his coat and wrapped it around the shivering dog. "Come on," he said softly. "You can't stay here." The dog hesitated for a moment, then slowly stood up and followed him, limping slightly. As they walked away from the grave, he couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting wasn't just a coincidence. It felt like fate, like his son had sent this dog to him for a reason. The billionaire's mansion was grand, but it had felt empty for years. As he opened the door, the dog hesitated at the threshold, looking up at him with uncertain eyes. "It's okay," he said gently, patting the dog's head. "You're safe here." The dog stepped inside, its paws clicking softly on the marble floor. He led the dog to the kitchen, where he filled a bowl with water and set it down. The dog drank eagerly, its tail wagging slightly. Next, he found some leftover chicken in the fridge and placed it in another bowl. The dog devoured the food, and for the first time, he noticed a spark of life in its eyes. As the dog ate, he sat down on the floor beside it, watching quietly. He hadn't felt this kind of connection in years. The dog finished eating and looked at him, its head tilted as if to say, "Thank you." He reached out and scratched behind its ears, and the dog leaned into his touch, letting out a soft sigh. That night he couldn't sleep. His mind was filled with thoughts of his son and the strange dog that had appeared at the grave. He got up and walked to the living room, where he had made a makeshift bed for the dog. To his surprise, the dog was awake, sitting by the window and staring out at the moon. It turned to look at him, and for a moment he felt as if the dog understood his pain. "You miss someone too, don't you?" he whispered. The dog whined softly, and he sat down beside it, staring out at the night sky. They sat there in silence, two souls bound by loss and loneliness. Days turned into weeks, and the dog became a constant presence in his life. It followed him everywhere, through the sprawling halls of the mansion, into the garden where he often sat to think, and even to his office, where it would curl up at his feet while he worked. The dog's quiet companionship was a balm to his aching heart, and slowly he began to smile again. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, he found himself talking to the dog. He told it stories about his son, how the boy had loved animals, how he had always wanted a dog but never got the chance to have one. The dog listened intently, its eyes never leaving his face, as if it understood every word. "I think he would have loved you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The dog rested its head on his lap, and he felt a tear slip down his cheek. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. But as the days passed, he began to notice something strange. The dog would often wander off to a corner of the garden and dig at the ground. At first, he thought it was just a habit, but one day he decided to investigate. He followed the dog to the spot and watched as it dug furiously, its paws moving with purpose. Curious, he knelt down and helped clear away the dirt. To his astonishment, he found a small, weathered box buried beneath the soil. His hands trembled as he opened it, and inside he found a collection of old photographs and a letter. The photos were of his son, smiling and happy, and the letter was addressed to him. His heart raced as he unfolded the letter. It was written in his son's handwriting, and as he read the words, tears streamed down his face. The letter spoke of love, forgiveness, and the hope that one day his father would find peace. It ended with a simple request: "Take care of the dog. It's my gift to you." He looked at the dog, his vision blurred by tears. "You were his, weren't you?" he whispered. The dog wagged its tail as if to say yes. In that moment, he felt a profound sense of connection, not just to the dog, but to his son. It was as if a bridge had been built between the past and the present, and for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. Just as the billionaire was beginning to heal, a shadow loomed over his newfound peace. One morning, as he and the dog were walking through the garden, a sleek black car pulled up to the gates of his mansion. A man in a sharp suit stepped out, holding a folder in his hand. The billionaire recognized him immediately. It was his late wife's brother, a man he had never trusted. The man approached with a cold smile. "I heard you've taken in a stray," he said, his eyes flickering toward the dog. "Cute, but I'm afraid there's a problem." The billionaire frowned. "What are you talking about?" The man opened the folder and handed him a document. "This dog belongs to me. It ran away months ago, and I've been searching for it ever since. I want it back." The billionaire's heart sank as he scanned the papers. They appeared to be official documents, complete with photos and ownership records. But something felt off. He looked at the dog, who was now standing protectively by his side, its ears flattened and a low growl rumbling in its throat. "This dog was found at my son's grave," he said firmly. "It has no collar, no identification. How do I know these papers are real?" The man's smile turned into a sneer. "You think I'd lie about something like this? That dog is mine, and if you don't hand it over, I'll take you to court. And trust me, you don't want to go down that road." The billionaire clenched his fists, his mind racing. He couldn't lose the dog. Not now, not after everything it had come to mean to him. But he also knew that his brother-in-law was a powerful man with connections. This wasn't going to be easy. "I'll fight you," he said, his voice steady. "This dog stays with me." The man laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "We'll see about that." He turned on his heel and walked back to his car, leaving the billionaire standing there, his heart pounding. As the car drove away, the dog nuzzled his hand, as if to reassure him. He knelt down and wrapped his arms around the animal, feeling its steady heartbeat against his chest. "I won't let him take you," he whispered. "I promise." The billionaire knew he couldn't fight this battle alone. He called his lawyer, a sharp and experienced woman who had been with him through countless challenges. When she arrived at the mansion, he explained the situation, showing her the documents his brother-in-law had left behind. "These papers look legitimate," she said, flipping through them, "but something feels off. Why would he wait this long to claim the dog? And why now of all times?" "I don't know," the billionaire admitted, "but I can't lose this dog. It's more than just a dog to me." His lawyer nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "We'll fight this, but we need evidence. Do you have anything that proves the dog was abandoned or mistreated? Anything that ties it to your son?" He thought for a moment, then remembered the box he had found in the garden. He retrieved it and showed her the letter and photos. Her eyes widened as she read the letter. "This could be crucial," she said. "If we can prove that the dog was connected to your son, it might help our case. But we'll need more. We'll need to dig into your brother-in-law's past and see if there's anything that discredits his claim." The legal battle began swiftly. His brother-in-law filed a lawsuit demanding the return of the dog. The media caught wind of the story, and soon the case was making headlines. "Billionaire in legal fight over stray dog," the papers read. The public was divided. Some sympathized with the billionaire, while others accused him of using his wealth to take what wasn't his. The stress was overwhelming. The billionaire found himself spending sleepless nights, staring at the dog as it slept peacefully by his feet. He couldn't shake the feeling that losing the dog would mean losing the last connection he had to his son. One evening, as he sat in his study, the dog suddenly stood up and began to bark. It was unusual. The dog was always calm and quiet. It ran to the door, scratching at it urgently. "What is it, boy?" he asked, opening the door. The dog bolted outside, running toward the garden. He followed, his heart racing. In the garden, the dog began digging furiously in the same spot where they had found the box. This time, it uncovered something else, a small rusted key. The billionaire picked it up, his mind spinning. What did it open? And why had the dog led him to it? The key felt heavy in his hand, as if it carried the weight of secrets long buried. He turned it over, examining it closely, but there were no markings or clues to indicate what it might unlock. The dog sat beside him, panting softly, its eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his heart race. "Where did you find this?" he murmured, more to himself than to the dog. The animal whined as if urging him to follow. It trotted toward the mansion, stopping at the door and looking back at him expectantly. Inside, the dog led him to a part of the house he rarely visited, the old study that had once belonged to his late wife. The room had been untouched for years, a shrine to memories he had tried to forget. Dust covered the furniture, and the air smelled faintly of old books and faded perfume. The dog walked straight to a small wooden cabinet in the corner, scratching at its door. The billionaire's breath caught in his throat. He knelt down, inserting the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click, and the door creaked open. Inside, he found a stack of letters and a journal. His hands trembled as he picked up the journal, recognizing his wife's handwriting on the cover. He opened it, and the first page took his breath away. "If you're reading this, it means you've found the key and the dog. I hope it's brought you some comfort, as it once did for me." He read on, his heart pounding. The journal revealed a story he had never known. His wife had secretly adopted the dog after their son's death, hoping it would help her cope with the grief. But when she fell ill, she had hidden the dog to protect it from her brother, who had always hated animals and would have gotten rid of it if he had the chance. "I couldn't bear to lose another piece of our son," she had written. "The dog was his dream, and it became mine. Please take care of it. It's my final gift to you." Tears streamed down his face as he closed the journal. He looked at the dog, who was sitting quietly beside him, its eyes filled with understanding. "You were hers," he whispered, "and now you're mine." The letters in the cabinet were addressed to his brother-in-law, filled with warnings and pleas to leave the dog alone. It was clear that his wife had known her brother's true nature, a man driven by greed and cruelty. With the journal and letters in hand, the billionaire felt a surge of determination. He had the evidence he needed to fight back. But more than that, he had the truth, a truth that tied the dog to his family in a way he had never imagined. The courtroom was tense as the billionaire's lawyer presented the evidence: the journal, the letters, and the key. She painted a vivid picture of a family torn apart by grief, a woman's love for her son, and a brother's heartless greed. The judge listened intently, his expression unreadable. When it was his brother-in-law's turn to speak, the man tried to argue that the documents were forged, that the billionaire was using his wealth to manipulate the truth. But his lies unraveled under the weight of the evidence. The letters from the billionaire's late wife were authenticated, and the journal's heartfelt words left no room for doubt. Finally, the judge delivered his verdict. "The dog rightfully belongs to the plaintiff," he said, gesturing to the billionaire. "The evidence clearly shows that it was entrusted to him by his late wife. The defendant's claim is dismissed." The billionaire felt a wave of relief wash over him. He looked at the dog, who was sitting calmly by his side, and smiled. It was over. The dog was his, not just by law, but by love and loyalty. As they left the courtroom, his brother-in-law approached him, his face twisted with anger. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You think you've won, but you'll regret this." The billionaire met his gaze without flinching. "I've already lost more than you can ever take from me," he said quietly. "But I won't let you hurt this dog, or anyone else, ever again." With that, he turned and walked away, the dog trotting faithfully beside him. The media swarmed around them, but he ignored the questions and cameras. All that mattered was the bond he had forged with this animal, a bond that had brought him back from the brink of despair. Back at the mansion, he sat in the garden, the dog resting its head on his lap. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the flowers and trees. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. "You've given me so much," he said to the dog, stroking its head. "You've brought me back to life." The dog looked up at him, its eyes filled with love and loyalty. In that moment, he knew that his son and wife were watching over him, smiling. They had sent him this dog, a symbol of healing, love, and second chances. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, he made a silent promise. He would honor their memory by living a life filled with kindness and compassion, and he would never take for granted the gift they had given him, a loyal friend who had helped him find his way back to the light.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.